Is Alex Leferrier, who is the Director of Coastal Marine Programs here at the Nature Conservancy in New Hampshire. Alex first joined the Nature Conservancy in the spring of 2017. Alex coordinates and executes marine and estuarine and marine conservation projects in the Great Bay Estuary and along New Hampshire's coast. Alex's main projects are focused on oyster restoration in Great Bay and on sustainable fisheries in the marine environment. Her background is in marine conservation ecology. Alex holds a master's degree in marine biology from the University of Oregon and a PhD from Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. Thank you for joining us. And sitting next to Alex is Rich Pettigrew, who is president and CEO of Seaport Fish Company. In 1878, Rich's uncle and grandfather opened the first seaport location in Rye, cutting fish in the back of their home. Rich grew up working with his uncle, developing a passion for the seafood industry. From the age of 10, Rich learned a business, finally purchasing it from his uncle in 1997. Today, Seaport Fish contracts with Portsmouth fishing vessels to buy directly from local fishermen and distribute fish to wholesale and retail customers, reflecting Rich's vision of providing quality seafood from the boat to the table. So there's a lot to talk about. That film was pretty comprehensive. So I have a few questions that I'll ask our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask our panelists, please be thinking about it, and we'll be having a microphone during the question and answer portion. So I'm just going to start with sort of a quick gut check from each of you. As the credits started rolling, what was going through your mind? What's your gut feeling towards the film?
Well, I can say both sides of it was pretty spot on. The conservancy side of it, with the science, and the fishing side of it being detrimental to all vessels and fishermen themselves. And the science side, it's been a fight for years and sort of nailed it.
I don't know if I need this, but yeah, I would agree with Rich. It was really raw. It was very real, tangible. It's a conversation that we've been part of for a number of years here in New England, and it happens all around the world. It was charged. I think it was pretty raw. So it was a little emotional to watch, but in a good way.
Great. So Alex, this film is about protecting fish while preserving a way of life. Your work as the Coastal Marine Director here at the Conservancy really speaks directly to both of those things, really creating a balance between protecting fish and trying to preserve a way of life here in New Hampshire. So can you speak a little bit about how the Nature Conservancy and you sort of work with local fishermen to keep them in the water while protecting the resource?
Sure, I'll start kind of high level. So one of our main strategies at the Nature Conservancy is working on sustainable fisheries, and that's at a global level, an international level, and here in New England. And the focus here in New England is we work with the groundfish fleet. We have a permit banking system where we here in the New Hampshire chapter own 3 multi-species groundfish permits, and we enroll those in our New Hampshire sector, and then we lease our quota to active fishermen at favorable market rate as a kind of an economic incentive to work with us on sustainable fisheries. And the way that we do that is we go to the fishermen and we talk to them about what their challenges are, what they're seeing on the water, what they'd like to see as solutions. They know more about their fishery than anybody. They know where the fish are, and they know the best way that they could fix it. And we work with them on sustainable gear or gear alterations, so raising like foot ropes on nets, and also working on electronic monitoring, so getting more data into on the table and more data into the stock assessment. And more data is a nice piece of the pie that everybody's kind of into. More data means better information for better decisions.
So Rich, you've been part of the industry for a long time and seen a lot of changes. One of the things that struck me in the film is the amount of dockside infrastructure that there is supporting the industry, and when the industry changes, obviously that dockside infrastructure changes along with it. I'm just curious if you can speak a little bit about your experience and what you've seen over the years and sort of, how the fisheries have changed and how the sort of support system has changed.
Sure. I say growing up, I mean, you had codfish that were, 4 feet long. You had 100-pound totes of haddock that, 5 fish would fill it, and now everything's just smaller. Even go back 10 years ago, we were unloading a lot of vessels between Portsmouth Harbor and Rye Harbor, and as far as our groundfish went, they pretty much gave us the majority of what we would need. We actually leased part of the pier for a long time. We would truck whatever we didn't need. We would truck to Portland auction for the guys, and then to the Boston market and auction for them. And we would take what we needed, and overflow would go to the other markets. Now, there's no need for really anyone even at the piers to unload because it's so limited. We've come to where I have to now, we have a truck that stays down the Boston Fish Pier, and then when the boats unload them on there, they get the fish off of the vessels direct right there. But saying that, the infrastructure part of it, years ago, no one was really fighting over the fish per se. There was abundance of it. There was, if you didn't get some off of this boat, you get it off the next boat. But now it's very limited, so it's changed drastically.
So I'm going to open it up to the audience. Krista is going to need a microphone. See, she can take mine. I'm going to steal that one. If you have a question, raise your hand, and Krista will bring the microphone up, and then I'll put that. And make Krista run up and down these stairs.
Hi. Couple of points that I think are very salient and very important to this whole issue, which were not brought up and not addressed by anyone, not from the NOR and scientific side, and not from the fishermen's side. There are 3 major migrations of codfish into the New England Grand Banks area every year. One of the major problems that our fishermen are facing, and I'm not related to or now a commercial fisherman, although my family's been here 400 years, is that we have huge numbers of foreign trawlers that come in and actually decimate the cod migration before it even gets here. So our fishermen are being required to restrict the amount of fish they are catching within our, shall we say, coastal historic fishing waters. But there are huge, huge numbers of global, massive, city-sized trawlers that are literally sucking up massive amounts of perfectly viable fish, whether it's cod, haddock, tuna, whatever. And they only cherry pick what they actually want, whether it's cod or haddock. And they literally take and grind up everything they don't want and dump it back into the ocean. Now in some places, like up in Damascotta, Maine, the lobster population has exploded tremendously because they're bottom feeders. They eat trash, primarily dead flesh. And people seem to be missing the point that we are monitoring our fishing industry in a reasonable way, but without the intervention of our federal government at a higher level globally, we are in a very, very catch-22 situation. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
So it's something, I think to the question, something that I've heard, and I just want to ask you, so a lot of the individual fishermen or sort of smaller fishermen have been getting out, and I've heard there has been industry changes about where those permits go and sort of the aggregation in larger vessels and maybe even some foreign vessels coming in, sort of changing the industry from more of a family affair to a larger corporate sort of entities. And how has that affected sort of the fishery and how fishing has been done in New England?
Sure. I can't speak too much about the seiners and items like that. I don't really know what they catch. I don't know if anyone really knows. But I do know, a lot of our vessels have a hard time getting out to where they're able to fish. It's only they can just go and fish wherever the fish are. They have rolling closures. They have certain areas they can only fish. And the vessels really, especially in New Hampshire, they can't even really go out that far. So, the fish migration patterns are out there. As far as who is, you know, actually catching them, the seiners, they do catch a lot. You know, that's probably speaks to why over 90% of the seafood that comes into this country is imported, or is imported, that is not domestic. But I can't really speak to, you know, who controls that, but I mean, federal government definitely, yes, is at the top, and they're not watching. They're more worried about the little guys than the big guys.
I would just add that when we moved from a days at sea to a permit and a quota allocation, that was a big concern for a lot of groups, is that the big permits without the big quota allocation would be bought up by big boats or big companies, maybe even just big out of like New Bedford. And that's part of the reason why TNC and other organizations formed these alliances, so they could have permit banks to keep them local. And that local access to the fishery. So.
Thanks.
One of the things that struck me from the film was the debate over the data that was coming in. The fishermen were saying the fish are there, the scientists were saying the fish are not there. Which is true, or do we know?
So I'm going to hand it over, but someone at TNC, when I first started to talk about fisheries, said, you know, sort of counting fish is sort of like counting trees in the forest, except they're underwater, you can't see them, and they swim around and move everywhere. So other than that, it's really easy. But I'm going to turn it over to Alex first.
All right, so stock assessment is incredibly complicated, which I'm sure a lot of you know. To break it down, there's the ABCs of stock assessment. So you have abundance, how many fish are out there. And then you have biology, so like growth factors and survival. And then you have catch, so what the fishermen are catching, right? So there's fishery catch data is fishery dependent surveys. So what's coming in from them. And then a lot of variables that go into the stock assessment about abundance and growth, that's not catch. And there's age and sex and other things involved in the biology, right? Those are fishery independent surveys. So this is a boat that's going out and doing surveys for a smaller number of days a year in certain specific areas. So fishermen are going out and looking for their fish, right? So they're targeting them. And it's amazing what they know in terms of following thermoclines and these kinds of things. And with science, we want to be random. So you want to have a representative sample of the population. So you can see where those ABCs they have a hard time coming together on the track and moving forward. But I do think in recent years that there's been a couple of things. There's been a small amount of trust that's been starting to be developed, and that the stock assessors and the managers are really starting to listen, and they're starting to see, like you saw John Bullard out on his boat, he was like, wow, there really are cod out here. And fishermen will tell me all the time, there's tons of cod, we can't stay away from them. Once they catch their allocated quota of cod, they can't go fishing anymore. And so I think it's starting to come together, and that speaks to the more data we can get into the system, I think those two lines will start to come together, and the more that they listen, the managers and fishermen listen to each other, and I do think that that's starting to happen. I just went to a COD structure being like age, growth, and reproduction symposium, and there was a lot of fishermen there, a lot of the guys that you saw in the movie, and all the managers, and they're going to meet like 5 times over the next year about how do they merge, how do they get this on-water observation to the table.
No, you pretty much said everything. But I can tell you, like, on the fisherman side, 10 years ago when the talk started coming out about, getting limited on cod, they were against it, and then it was, it ended up being 800 pounds a day, where they said, okay, we're good with that, and then that worked. And then it went to 400 a day, and they weren't happy about it, but then that started working. From them, they said there was times, yes, they definitely should have been cut back earlier, but they were allowed to keep fishing. They noticed, a lesser catch, but there was always years there was lesser catch, but now they are starting to work together a lot more, and the trust is going to be the big thing between the science and the fishermen.
Thank you. I have two questions. Flashback to the first question that the lady asked about foreign trawlers. I'm sure many others have heard this before in the room. We've heard of their imposing on our limits and not abiding by our laws, but what folks didn't answer, which is of interest to me, is the limit. There is a mile, there's a border limit if it's ever enforced. But I believe there's one that's, correct me if I'm wrong, 12 miles out, and another that's 200 miles out. So one, could you expand on what they're supposed to honor? I emphasize supposed to, whether they do or not is another item. And then the second question refers to the bottom, the trawlers that use seine nets and pull up all the fish. They can't be discreet and pull up. They can't push the button and select cod and scrod only. They're going to pull up everything that's on the bottom. So when they come up and drop it on the floor of the boat, isn't it true that a lot of them do die just because of, I'll use an analogy to what divers incur, is the bends. So when a diver comes up too quickly, we get the bends if we come up too quickly from the depths. Don't fish have something relative to their bladders that expand that will actually, even if they're thrown back in, they decease, they die?
So I'm going to turn this one over to Alex, because I believe she knows the answer, at least to the second one, not sure about the first one.
Okay, so what Ron is referring to is what we call barotrauma. So when a fish is brought up from depth, it has a swim bladder or an air bladder. So when it's brought up quickly, say in a net, that swim bladder can come out of its mouth and be exposed. But if it's decompressed, if it's sent back down at a rate, or if it's in a like in a cage or something that's enclosing it, then that swim bladder can come back in, and that fish can actually. There's variable rates of success on this, but that some fish can swim off and be part of the fish in the sea again that day. And actually, we have a couple of local New Hampshire fishermen that we've been talking about working on some barotrauma research, or basically to increase the ability to discard fish that have the ability to potentially be part of the fishery or the population for a number of times until maybe it's caught again or maybe it reproduces. So you are allowed to, if you were allowed to discard cod. So there's fishermen that this is a problem for them. They see fish that come up, they're able to survive, they're young, or they want to throw them back because they can be reproducing, they're not allowed to, they need to land those fish. And so it's a project that, these fishermen are like, this is a real problem, how can we work on it? So it's very early days on that kind of study, but it's an excellent point.
No.